Life at home had been a little chaotic that week. My girlfriend had taken a bad fall during her horseback riding class and ended up with a concussion, so she was on strict rest. That meant I basically slipped into the role of full-time dog parent. We have 3 dogs, and when they don't get their walk on time, they turn into little gremlins. So around 7:30 that evening, after cleaning up dinner, I grabbed the leashes and took them out for their usual loop around the park behind our place. We live in a pretty calm college town, the kind of place where people jog at night or walk their dogs with earbuds and without thinking twice. The park area behind our building connects to this long greenway everyone calls the Green Line. It's a long stretch of trail with trees, scattered lights, benches, and a steady stream of joggers and cyclists during the day. Once you go deep enough in, nobody really cares about leash rules, so we usually let the dogs run around. Their collars have those little glow lights clipped on, so watching them dart around in the dark looks like watching 3 tiny UFOs. After they burned off their energy, I clipped them back on and started heading home. I had Michael Bublé of all things playing quietly in one earbud, and I was eating a slightly bruised banana I had shoved into my pocket earlier. It was one of those calm, nothing special moments that suddenly shifts into something you remember forever. Up ahead, under one of the few spaced-out streetlights, I saw someone walking toward me. At first, I didn't think much of it. Night walkers are normal. But the closer he got, the more wrong it felt. The guy was tall. Not just tall. Tall in a way that didn't look natural. Long limbs, slow steps, and this steady, too smooth gliding movement. It reminded me of the walking scene from Signs where the alien crosses the alley. That same unnatural vibe. He was holding something in front of him, arms wrapped almost too perfectly around it, like someone pretending to cradle a baby instead of actually holding one. His head wasn't angled down in any kind of protective way. His eyes were locked straight ahead, right at me. My dogs, normally loud and chaotic, suddenly went silent and alert. That alone made my stomach tighten. When we finally passed each other, I glanced down to see the baby he was cradling. It wasn't moving at all. The skin looked shiny, stiff, plastic. It was a doll, or something worse. But my brain immediately chose doll, because the alternative was too much. I let out a quiet, awkward little trying to just get past the moment like a normal human. He didn't react. Not even a blink. He only kept staring straight at me, eyes wide and empty. I kept walking, heart pounding harder than I wanted to admit. When I glanced back a few seconds later, I froze. The man had stopped under the light and was turning his head, only his head, back toward me. Slowly. No shift in his shoulders, no step. Just his head rotating like a puppet. Another glance back. Now his whole body had turned to face me, still holding that baby stiffly in his arms, still not blinking. That was it. I pulled out my phone and called my girlfriend. I didn't even explain anything. I just told her to stay on the line and talk to me like it was a normal casual conversation. She instantly understood and went along with it. I walked fast, checking over my shoulder every few seconds. For a while, he stayed there, perfectly still. On my 6th or 7th check, he finally turned back around and continued walking the direction he came from. That entire night I kept replaying it. The stiff baby, the unblinking stare, the robotic walk, the slow head turn. I reported it to the police, but the dispatcher didn't seem too concerned. Maybe the guy wasn't doing anything illegal, but something about him felt deeply wrong. The kind of wrong that sticks with you long after you're safe at home. I never thought a simple trip to the park could turn into something that would stick with me for years. It started on a Saturday afternoon in late October. I live in a small town in Pennsylvania, and we have this local park that's really popular in spring and summer, but gets almost empty in the fall. I was supposed to meet a few friends there for a casual hangout. Just some snacks, a little catch-up, nothing serious. The park has a few pavilions, but one of them, smaller, older one in the back near the trees, is almost never used. My friends had suggested we meet there because it's quiet and private. I got there first. Parking was easy, and I could see the pavilion from the lot, maybe 150 yards away. When I approached, I noticed it looked off. I don't know how else to describe it. The pavilion itself was covered in a thin layer of grime, the kind that only comes from sitting in used for months. A few of the wooden beams had peeling paint, and some boards along the floor were warped. There were a couple of picnic tables underneath, but it looked like no one had touched them in years. I shrugged it off. My friends were running late, and I didn't really think much of it. Then I noticed the backpack. It was lying on one of the picnic tables, a plain black backpack, unzipped slightly. At first, I thought maybe someone had left it there and gone off somewhere in the park. But there was something strange about it. It didn't look like it had been left behind carelessly. It was placed neatly, almost intentionally. I stepped closer, curiosity mixed with a creeping sense of unease. Inside, I could see a notebook and what looked like a water bottle. The notebook was open to a page with writing that I couldn't make out from where I was standing. I glanced around. There was no one else in sight. No joggers, no kids playing, not even any people on the paths nearby. The air felt heavier than normal. I shook my head, telling myself I was overthinking it. Maybe someone was just using the pavilion and had stepped away. I decided to sit at the far end of the pavilion and wait for my friends. My phone was out, scrolling through messages, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I kept glancing toward the tree behind the pavilion. There was nothing there, at least nothing I could see, but something in my gut told me to stay alert. About 15 minutes later, I heard the faintest sound of movement, like someone shifting their weight, but I figured it was probably just a squirrel or a bird. Then the backpack zipped itself closed. I froze. There was no wind, nothing to make it move. It just zipped up, as if someone had done it deliberately. My heart started to race. I called out softly, "Hello? Is anyone here?" No response. I debated leaving right then, but I didn't want to make a scene in front of my friends when they arrived. I told myself it was probably just a prank, maybe someone hiding in the trees, messing with people who used the pavilion. Still, I didn't move from the bench. Another 10 minutes passed. I kept checking my phone, telling myself I'd leave if they didn't show soon. Then I noticed the notebook again. It was now closed, lying flat on the table. I definitely hadn't touched it. My fingers itched to open it, to see what was inside, but I hesitated. There was something about the way it was positioned that felt deliberate, almost like whoever had left it wanted me to notice, but not touch it. Then I saw it. A pair of shoes, brown sneakers, barely visible behind one of the pavilion's support beams. I could just make out the toes pointing toward me. Whoever they weren't moving. My first instinct was to call out again, but my voice caught in my throat. The shoes stayed there. After a long moment, I realized I could see the edge of jeans and a sleeve. Someone was crouched, completely still, watching me. I jumped to my feet, backing away, and the figure didn't move. I tried to convince myself it was a trick of the light, someone sitting very still, but I knew it wasn't. I could see the slight rise and fall of a shoulder. Panic surged. I fumbled for my phone, but it wasn't enough. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely hold it. I turned to run toward the parking lot. When I looked back, the person was gone. Just gone. No trace, no sound, no movement. My heart was hammering so hard I thought I might pass out. I didn't even wait for my friends. I ran straight to my car, locked the doors, and drove home. The next day, I tried to convince myself I had imagined it. Maybe I was on edge, tired from the week, and the shadows had played tricks on me. I even went back to the park in daylight to check the pavilion. The backpack was gone. The notebook wasn't there. Everything looked normal, just like any other neglected pavilion in a quiet park. I told my friends what happened when I finally saw them. They laughed, thinking I was exaggerating or trying to scare them. I didn't press it. I just avoided that part of the park from then on. Months later, I found out from a neighbor that there had been a missing person case the previous year. A teenage boy, last seen near that very pavilion, had vanished without a trace. They never found him. No one had reported seeing him after the day he disappeared. I never learned if it was connected, but it made that afternoon in the pavilion feel different. It wasn't just a scare anymore. It was a real brush with something I couldn't explain. I still walk past that park sometimes, but I avoid the back pavilion. Even now, years later, when I pass by it on my way to the trails, I get that same uneasy feeling, like someone is watching from just behind the trees. And I've learned something I didn't understand back then. Some places in town aren't empty, even when they look like they are. This happened just a few days before the story was written, and the person telling it is still shaken up by it. They and their best friend had gone to meet up with a couple of guys they'd been chatting with. Nothing serious, just a casual hangout in a big park near the edge of town. The kind of place you pick when you want space and don't want half the neighborhood watching you. But the park has a reputation. It's close to a couple of halfway houses and a transitional facility, so people going through tough situations often hang around. It's usually harmless, but the vibe is unpredictable. The guys they met up with ended up being unbelievably boring, so the girls drifted off to the curb to chat alone. While they were talking, this girl walked up to them, barefoot, shaking, crying no phone, clothes dirty, looking completely wrecked. She seemed genuinely scared, so they didn't brush her off. She asked if she could use the narrator's phone. Even though it felt risky, they handed it over. But once she had it, she froze. She said she couldn't remember anyone's phone number. She was shaking harder, crying harder, telling them she'd gone out drinking with a guy the night before. Something happened. She blacked out, woke up bruised in a parking lot, and then was taken to the hospital with a head injury. She said the hospital didn't do a rape kit and eventually dropped her off at the park when she said she didn't remember her address. She kept apologizing for ruining their day, which made them feel even worse for her. When one of the girls suggested calling 911, the woman panicked. She said she didn't trust the police. She said people like her don't get listened to, especially women of color, and she didn't want to get thrown into a psych ward again. That comment hit them sideways, but they still wanted to help her. They offered to drive her back to the hospital and stay with her. She agreed, then suddenly insisted they first take her to a convenience store a few miles away. She said she needed to meet someone. She got more frantic the more they hesitated, so eventually they gave in. They drove her there. The entire ride, she was digging around nonstop in her bag, never once taking her hand out of it. She'd mumble weird things under her breath, staring at the narrator in the passenger seat. When they pulled behind the store, the girl suddenly jumped out of the car and ran toward two men who were waiting behind the building. They didn't look concerned at all, especially the taller man, who just stood stiffly, grabbed her wrists, and didn't react to her crying. The girls tried to explain everything, that she needed help, that she had said she was hurt, but the man barely acknowledged them. Then he said something chilling. "If you really want to help her, come with us." They offered to follow in their own car. He refused. He insisted all of them needed to get into a small sedan. The girl, now acting totally different, started fake crying and grabbing their arms, saying, "You said you'd stay with me." Then she switched into yelling, grabbing one of the girls hard enough to leave marks. The man accused them of hurting her. Then he grabbed the narrator's arm and tried pulling her toward his car. That was the moment everything snapped into pure survival mode. The friend let out a loud scream. Not a dramatic movie scream, but a real terror scream that got the man to loosen his grip. They scrambled back into their own car as he shoved the narrator away. The man dragged the girl into his car and drove away fast. The girls called 911 immediately. They gave the entire story to the police. A few days later, the police told them the truth. The girl had been at the hospital the night before, but not for assault. It was a drug-related psychiatric episode. The man she ran to wasn't related to her at all, but it did have a long history of aggravated kidnapping charges. Police told them flat out that going with him could have ended in something horrific.